This is Recruiting Roundtable, where we talk to HR and talent acquisition leaders about thoughtful topics in the world of recruiting. For today's discussion, we're going to be talking about a really interesting topic, which is recruiting tools. Probably one of the most popular topics. There are so many exciting solutions out right now, been out, new ones popping up every day that are touching every part of the recruiting process. And we have three fantastic people here to talk about this exact topic, three very qualified people. We're excited to have Sergey Kalnish, who's a technical talent acquisition manager at Rose Rocket. We have Jason Miller, who's VP People and Talent at SproutsAI, and Anderson Clendeninn, former talent acquisition leader at SeatGeek. Sergey, Jason, Anderson, thanks for joining. Appreciate it, guys.
Pleasure, Sean.
Of course. Good to be here.
All righty. So let's start with some intros. Please just give us a short intro of who you are and maybe just like a short background of kind of like some of the things you've worked on. Let's start with Jason. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I've been in the talent space for over 20 years now. Kind of grew up in the tech recruiting space. Was very early on at an open source company called Cloudera. Ended up staying there through IPO and a merger. Moved on to Roblox when it was a little kids video game company pre-pandemic, and then pandemic hits and the metaverse explodes, and that was a high growth job as well, and wanted to get back to doing something small. And about a year and a half ago, I connected up with a company I'm at right now, a company called SproutsAI, which is an AI tool in the recruiting space. So sort of on the other side of the phone calls that I used to take in some of my previous roles.
This is great. So we're excited to learn more about SproutsAI today. Thank you, Jason. Let's go with Anderson.
All right. Yeah. So I've been in the recruiting space for about 12 years now. I think similar to most people, I started in the agency recruiting world, made a transition after a couple years to an RPO called Bink. Primary reason there was wanting to get closer to the clients, actually be able to put in a bit more of a procedural focus, right? How we actually build processes to help companies scale at the pace they need. So really love that. It's been about 4 years of my career in the RPO, sort of leading projects and things like that. And then made a move in-house in about 2016, I want to say. What my focus has been really on then is getting closer to clients, helping build sort of long-term processes, partnerships with our internal stakeholders. I went to Pure Storage, then spent some time at a smaller startup in the fintech space called Adapar, and most recently was with SeatGeek. All of these positions, I think similar to Jason, were in high growth space, right? And wanted to make sure we could grow as quickly as possible. I have been predominantly focused on tech recruiting throughout my career, but in the last few years, call it 4 or 5, had expanded that scope to G&A hiring as well. So it's been a fun space and a lot of exciting opportunities to build in the past.
That's great. Thank you, Anderson. Amazing background. We got an all-star lineup today. I'm excited. And last but not least, we have Sergey, who I just found out is not a neighbor, but when you live up north of the city, you're pretty much my neighbor. So Sergey, please introduce yourself to the group.
That's right. I'm Sergey. Nice to be here. Similar to Anderson in terms of my career trajectory, I started out in tech recruiting in agency just over 10 years ago now. Did that for 3.5 years, kind of climbed the ranks there, and then left to start my own company called Smart Hire. Did some consulting for a time, experimented with different approaches to recruiting, setting up RPOs, doing retained fractional search, launching some global talent stream solutions when that first kind of came around, 2017, 2018. And then in 2020 transitioned into in-house tech recruiting, starting with a company on the West Coast called Jobber, and then spent a year at Quora out in the Valley, and then came back to where I am now, which is Rose Rocket, a Toronto-based Series B B2B SaaS startup. Yeah, that's been my journey. Kind of did a little bit of everything, and still learning to this day.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sergey. And I will tell you, someone who kind of, we're both in the Toronto area. I ran a recruiting agency for a while, and almost every candidate that I would connect to on LinkedIn was already connected with Sergey. So this guy's the real deal. Lastly, my name is Sean Huynh. I'm managing director at Rocket. And, at Rocket, we take a scientific approach to recruiting by combining our talented recruiters with our AI model that we've trained over 7 years and our programmatic sourcing techniques to find and engage candidates in ways that are absolutely impossible to do with LinkedIn or a lot of other tools. So it's something that we're really excited about. All right, so let's kind of get into it. I know each of you shared a little bit about your journey into this, into the field of talent acquisition and kind of your background, but I'd love to just discuss like high level, like what motivates you, right? Like what kind of gets you going, and why have you, all of the three of you, been in this space for now quite some time? Let's start with Sergey. Go ahead, Sergey.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, number one for me is like, it's really challenging, right? Like anybody that's done recruiting, especially in a hot market like Toronto in tech, it's extremely challenging. It's something that you kind of have to continue learning, reinventing yourself, and there's never a dull day. So that's a big one for me. I just love technology, always have. My dad sort of back in the day started as an old school like computer programmer. Just love being on the front lines, like learning about new technology developments, and working in startups is also very exciting. You get to help really build these growing businesses, and it's great to be on the front lines and really having a significant impact on the success of the business.
That's great. What about you, Jason? What kind of gets you going?
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of echo a lot of the stuff, that Sergey said, that I grew up in the Bay Area, and kind of being in and around tech, but not being an engineer myself. There was still sort of a gravitational pull toward it. And then I talked to an engineer once, and he told me, "You're so lucky to be a recruiter." And I remember thinking, like, are you kidding me? Like, my job is find you. Like, how am I? You're the lucky one. And they said, there's so few jobs where you get to be attached to kind of like an inherently happy moment in someone's life. And this is getting a job, buying a house, getting married. Like, I'm not a realtor, I'm not a priest, but like I can help people find the way that they're gonna, provide for their family, or like help their self-identification that I work at XYZ company. So that's what still gets me going is now developing working on something that helps other people hire people, this kind of thing. Like that's my motivation.
It is definitely a great feeling when you help someone find a new job, and maybe they get a better title, or they get a raise, or it's just a better situation for them. I've never met one recruiter who doesn't feel amazing about that. Anderson, what about you? What's kind of kept you going over these 11 years you've been in recruiting?
Yeah, I'm going to echo a few things here from my counterparts, Sergey and Jason. But really, for me, I think the biggest thing has been the challenges, right? I always sort of approached recruiting as a puzzle, especially coming through agencies where you've got a blank desk and say, sort of build your own business. I always looked at it kind of like a fishing trip in a way, right? You've got to go find your bait or your candidates or your jobs, whatever it is that comes first, and then find the other and match the two together. So it was sort of finding the appropriate pieces to make the match, which I always really loved. And then as I've progressed in my career, the challenges have changed. There have been different flavors. It's about scaling at a certain speed, but there is no shortage of challenges. Whether it's learning a new part of the business or a new arm of the line of business that's spinning up, how you pitch that, how you talk about it to candidates. So, coming from a sales background, as much as I didn't like the sales job I was in before I came to recruiting, I did like aspects of it, being able to talk about, sort of a product or an opportunity. So really that stuff keeps me super motivated. And I got to say, Jason, I got to call this out. I noticed that you're a Bronco, or you've got a banner from Santa Clara University.
Yes.
Also Bronco as well. So just want to call that out. Yeah.
We're all over the place, man.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about your recruiting stack, right? Because we're going to get into the tools. That's what the conversation of this episode is about. So let's go broad strokes, right? What are some of for sure got to have tools in your stack, whether it's an ATS or like a sourcing tool or something else? What are some of those tools? What does that look like? Let's start with Sergey. Sergey, what you got in your stack?
Yeah, for sure. I will say, so when I came into Rose Rocket, we had just gone through a migration from Lever onto Ashby, which was kind of ironic because when I was leaving Quora, we had just migrated from Greenhouse to Ashby, and I kind of got a little glimpse of it. And it seemed like it had a lot of potential, but I've really gotten to experience like the full kind of capabilities of this ATS at Rose Rocket, and I will say it's one of the most powerful tools. I've worked with anywhere from scheduling automation to sourcing, CRM, analytics. So that's probably, I mean, you got to have your ATS. That's kind of the foundation, right, of your, if you're in-house, of your recruiting stack. In this case, Ashby does, email marketing automation as well. Previously, I've used like things like Gem and HireFlow, which are also, very effective. And then it's not necessarily a tool in a traditional sense, but I have to say it, like referrals as a platform, in a way it is a tool. It's just so effective and so powerful. At Rose Rocket last year, we made quite a few hires. Over half of that came from the referrals, and it's just, I mean, all the data is out there. Like, how much more likely are people to stay, to be engaged, be productive, and those sorts of things. So, kind of those three things for me are big because I'm big on sourcing, sort of outbound recruiting, and then I think between referrals and outbound takes a lot of pressure off of your, sort of traditional inbound recruiting.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Let's go to Jason. Let's talk a little bit about your recruiting stack.
Yeah. I think at its core, sort of what we do in the talent space is, I always talk about kind of a couple steps, but basically you find people, you engage people, you evaluate people, and you hire people, right? Mm-hmm. And I think right now you sort of have a tale of two recs where and this could even be one company. One company could have a rec they post on a Friday that they come in on Monday and there's 800 applicants. And, another recruiter at that company could post a more niche rec on Friday and come in on Monday and there's, 11 candidates, none of them are a match. So for kind of the first time, what I've seen is you need a tech stack that can both facilitate outbound passive. So to Sergey's point, whichever outbound kind of messaging tool you want, or sort of the heavy manual lift of a LinkedIn or whatever it may be. But at the same time, too, you've also got under-resourced teams now that are dealing with trying to go through those 1,000 applicants and do so in like an efficient, equitable way. So I think there's some neat tools coming out to kind of help with that as well. Sergey mentions, the need for an ATS. I spend my day telling people how ATSs are going away. So like I can maybe one day kind of talk to you, Sergey, about kind of my views on that. At the end of the day, though, what I would say is I think that your tech stack needs to be one that works for your company. Just like if you choose to go with an external agency or do stuff internal, it's got to be what works for your company. Mm-hmm. But we're at the precipice right now where like we're finally starting to see smart tools versus dumb tools, like tools that actually do some of the tasks that we didn't like to do in the past. Mm-hmm. And that's the stack I think is going to win out, are going to be the ones that embrace kind of the new technology and let us humans do the human stuff we want to do, and then not get kind of mired down with sort of the traditional, highly clerical administrative stuff anymore.
Definitely. I think there's a lot to be said. We're going to definitely unpack more of that. There's a lot of juice in that, so we're going to get back to that. Anderson, what about yourself? What are some of the key tools in your stack?
Yeah. So I'm going to probably mirror a bit of what Jason had talked about here. I mean, we're sort of an aggregator of tools, really, as sort of I've seen in my career. Primary tools, again, it's a combination of automation tools as well as sort of manual tools. On the sourcing side, it's LinkedIn, using things like Gem to help with sort of campaign management, things like that, as well as analytics. Grammarly, because not everybody is great at spelling or writing, so that definitely helps make the messages seem a bit more professional. So that's a tool. Our ATS is another big one. And then to sort of take this to the end of the process, right? Because I think we've been focusing a bit on the sort of beginning and sort of middle of the process, but candidate offers and things like that, candidate experience. We were using a tool that was acquired by PayScale and then sort of scuttled, unfortunately, called Agora. which was really great. It was sort of an offer packet tool, which really put a lot of visualization and data together, allowed candidates to sort of extrapolate value and things like that over time, which was really, really helpful when you're talking about the transition between sort of private stock versus a public traded company, sort of what that may look like. And then the other thing too, which is something that we found recently, which was really helpful, was a coordination tool. And the name of it I am blanking on, but it really automated the process of both getting matching schedules, which at a certain scale became crazy complicated, trying to get the specific leaders or interviewers you needed available for high volume roles. But at the same time, also automated messaging, right? So once we finish a debrief, advance a candidate, they're getting an automatic message saying, hey, we're really excited, and you can tweak and edit it as you need, but it really unlocked a lot of time for our coordinators to be involved and help out at other parts of the business as we were scaling, right? Focus more on sort of higher level, strategically how we up level this group versus the sort of day-to-day manual task of living in calendars. So
it's interesting. I love the notion of kind of like the automated, almost status updates, so to speak, or just kind of keeping in touch. Because a big, look, you can't go a day on LinkedIn if you're scrolling for more than 60 seconds without someone making a post about ghosting.
Sure.
Right. And it's tough. I've been most of my experience is on the agency side. And a lot of times we're chasing our clients for feedback, and maybe they're chasing for feedback internally. And sometimes candidates, we can't get back to them right away. So I want to ask the topic about ghosting and about the candidate experience in particular, and just making sure the candidate's kind of in the loop throughout the entire process. Are there some tools that you've used, whether it's an ATS or otherwise, that have helped really drive better candidate experience, whether it's just keeping the candidate in the loop or, maybe sending out a survey or anything like that? Maybe I'll start with Sergey. What are your thoughts on this? Like tools that have really improved or enhanced the candidate experience?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind. So number one, I'm going to go back to the ATS. Jason, I want to talk to you more about that because it's an interesting discussion. But for us at Rose Rocket, Ashby's been fantastic. One of the things that we're able to kind of uncover, there's a lot of functionality in there, but early on when I came in, I mean, we were hiring like crazy, 20 or so open recs at the same time, and scheduling was just an incredible nightmare because we had, specifically for our technical interviews, we sort of had two different pools of interviewers. We call drivers and passengers. So like the driver is really the experienced person that leads the interview. Passengers sort of the shadows and is kind of in training. So just to navigate all of that, pick a candidate from one pool, an interviewer from one pool to the other, find the rooms. And keep track of capacity, right? You don't want certain people to do too many interviews and others not to do any. Ashby has automation that allowed us to automate all of that. You basically, select certain interviewers to put them in one pool of interviewers, another pool of interviewers, and you create the logic and then just send the direct booking link to the candidate. Automatically picks, a person from one pool, a person from the next. There's a cap on, how many interviews to do per week, books the room, sends out all the invites, all the information. I mean, that was, a really, really significant improvement, both in the candidate experience, just because, it was in their control. They didn't have to wait for us to, figure out all the details on our end. They could just book the interview, and for us internally as well. The other thing is, alerts, right? Setting up alerts for if a candidate's been in a certain stage for, let's say 2 days without any kind of update, make sure the recruiter gets pinged, just to, even if there's no update at the time, other than like there is no update, we're still waiting, just have that quick touch point, to keep the candidate up to speed. Alerts to remind, interviewers to submit their scorecards and feedback, right? So like these all these little touch points really go a long way. And then I'm a little bit old school. So for me, like when you talk about candidate experience, I say one of the best tools is the phone. call the candidate, text the candidate. I think so much happens.
Super
over
underrated,
email.
man. Super underrated.
It's underrated. I'm from the agency days. We used to just, call and talk to people. And I think that kind of personal touch, goes a really long way. And final thing I'll say, because I've really put an emphasis on that at Rose Rocket, is at the end of the process, if the candidate's not successful, book a call, give them some feedback. Pick out some of the things that are, constructive. There's always something you can find that can be helpful. And that goes such a long way. People appreciate that so much. And I think as an industry, as a profession, we need to, I know it's hard, especially when you're hiring at scale, but it really, really goes a long way to make people feel like, they got a fair evaluation, a fair deal, and walking away, really feeling positive about the company and the employer brand.
I would definitely have to echo that, Sergey. I've talked to so many candidates who have said they've spent 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds, 2-3 hours doing a take-home test and not getting any feedback. So as a general, not calling out anyone in the room, I think as an industry, we got to do better for candidates out there, because I hear the story pretty much every day, unfortunately. Jason, what about you? In terms of tools, candidate experience, what do you think are some things, whether it's SproutsAI or otherwise, are doing to really enhance that candidate experience? Go ahead, my man.
I'm not biased.
It's okay, man. You work for the company. You can talk about it. We want to hear about it.
So I will say, kind of at its core, Sergey, you really hit sort of like a holy trinity, basically, of like speed, like the quicker, we need to make sure we respect people's time. The second piece, I loved you I call it the no update, but basically it is that, continue that connected tissue. It sounds like you guys are doing it with like alerts and such. And then you mentioned the phone. Like, I would even add to it, one of the mantras that I use a lot is this idea of like, meet people where they're at. Like, some people are text-based, some people are Telegram, some people want to, get hit up on WhatsApp. Some people want just email. Some people don't check emails, like this sort of thing. So to talk a little bit about kind of how Sprouts does those things. So we do get through stuff quickly. Like, we heavily leverage generative AI for our outreach. So like the no update isn't an alert, it's actually automated. That like candidates get personalized messages as when they've hit a particular number of days in a status. But on top of that too, meeting where we're at, we message you where you want to be messaged, whether that's proactive outreach and actually going out and like, hitting people in their socials. You cannot send an unsolicited SMS, just people watching, don't worry about that. That is against the law in America. And there's a lot of other places you can go out and get people. But all that being said, goes back to you are hiring a human being, and whatever it takes for you to not lose sight of that is what matters. And you have kind of a beat up candidate pool. You have a lot of people that have been impacted, people that have been made redundant, in some cases more than once. You see those things on LinkedIn where it's like, data-driven people that are saying, I've applied to 1,100 jobs and, only 6 have gotten back to me, like these sorts of things. Like, that matters more than anything. So any tool you have, be it one that uses automation to do it, be it reminders in Ashby, if I had to use an ATS, Ashby would be it, just for what it's worth, Sergey. I do think it's a fantastic product. Or whatever it might be. Like, if it's a referral, going to the person that referred them and giving them the update so that they understand, and because I don't know if you guys have seen this. I've talked to a ton of talent leaders over the last year and a half. When a lot of the impacts started, referrals peaked and everybody was trying to get their friend a job.
Yeah.
And what happened was those people didn't get jobs and the referrers didn't get feedback, and like referrals dropped off a cliff. And the reason they did so was because referrers felt bad. Like, they didn't want to have their friends who need work pinging them and not being able to give them any feedback. So they frankly stopped referring them. So it kind of goes back to that, like, it's the only job that I can think of where you're selling on two different sides. You're selling to your internal customers or your client, and you're selling to a human to take a job. And if at any point you forget that, that's when you tend to fall on your face.
You make a really great point about this being a beat up market. It's a really good, it's sad to say, but I was on LinkedIn the other day, a former colleague of mine, And like his post now was just, here we go again. And it was the green banner. And I chuckled a little bit because, like, you know, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but I'm like, damn, like, you know, he's living this, right? And it's serious. Like, you know, this is his livelihood. And he's like, here we go again. So, you know, hopefully the worst is behind us. I've been saying this for 6 months, and hopefully I'm right soon. Anderson, what about yourself? Any tools you've used that you think are really doing a great job on improving the candidate experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, as both Jason and Sergey said, I think the biggest thing here is really sort of making sure that you're focused on the individual candidate and kind of meeting them where they are. I'd say the biggest impact from tooling that I've seen was with Modern Loop, which was the name of the scheduling tool. It came back to me. But that tool really did help us make sure that throughout the process, we're making sure we're getting messaging out. It allowed you to really sort of slice and dice your messaging across different jobs, different job families, like specific roles, you know, whatever you want to call it, right? To get messaging out that was appropriate, set specific SLAs, all of that. And I think, again, the biggest thing for us was making sure that as we have candidates moving through the process, they're not getting stale, whether our process is one that moves across 2 weeks and we make a hire, or it's like a 4-month, longer, more protracted, more senior process. We want to make sure the touch points are there. Beyond that, again, I'll come back to this tool because I did love it and was very sad when it went away at the end of last year. But Agora, which was the offer tool that we were using, was really quite amazing, right? Like, it allowed for a candidate to really, you know, avoid all those questions you get at the end of the day. Like, all right, well, what's the 5X look like, right? What happens if I see a 2% salary growth over the course of the next 5 years? Where am I at if I'm not promoted? It allowed you to put in specific levers so that a candidate really could explore beyond just the work that they were doing, which is really what we focus on as recruiters. Like, this is the impact, this is the work. The next question is like, what financially is the impact for me? So being able to really walk through step by step, year by year, here's what the potential of this opportunity looks like beyond the job, that really helped. I mean, I think implementing Agora took us at SeatGeek from like a 68 to 70% acceptance rate to somewhere north of 80%. So it was a significant difference that we could really feel. And a lot of the feedback that we were getting back really came to, well, we could see the value in the offer and actually run numbers and see, you know, what this means at, you know, X, Y, and Z sort of potential growth rate. So channels of communication are always number one, but I think supplying people with specific data that helps them along their candidate journey is another really important aspect here.
Wow, that's a really incredible increase in the offer accept rate. Like, that's a big time value right there. So I want to do like a little. We have an interesting panel. So we have 2 buyers in the room, and we have 1 seller in the room. So I'm going to ask the buyers first. When you're evaluating software, any software, whether it's Agora or any of the tools that we've mentioned, what are some of the things that go through your mind when you're evaluating a new software product that you have to think about? And what are some of the things that would either tip the scales towards, I'm going to try it or buy this thing, or, you know, this is not going to really work? So I'll start with the 2 buyers. I'll start with Sergey, then go to Anderson. And then when I flip the question, Jason, like, what do you kind of like, what's your process that you go through when you're trying to engage a potential buyer to understand what their pains are to position, you know, your product? So let's start with Sergey. Talk to me about how you buy stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it kind of like, there's 2 categories, right? There's sort of fundamental tools that are, you know, really impactful across multiple kind of pain points, right? So an ATS is a good example of that. So it's interesting because our ASB contract is coming up for renewal soon, and like, as it happens, right?
Hey, don't show your account manager this podcast.
Actually,
they're gonna raise the price on you, man. If you show them this podcast.
No. But it's a very competitive space, right? And just so it happens, like Greenhouse and Team Taylor and all these other people are reaching out, right? I don't know how they do that, but timing wise, and you know, did the demos with them as well. And when evaluating something, you know, a big piece of your recruiting stack like that, you got to look at how many problems it can solve. Right, and can solve well. So for us, that's 3 main things: is obviously the, you know, basic application tracking and interview process or managing functionality. Scheduling became a huge thing just because I saw how much time it can save us, and how good it is for the candidate experience. And then sourcing, which is a big thing. And some of the tools are really expensive, like Jam. So, when you can combine a piece of software that solves several different problems and solves them well, I would say that's one area. Now, there's some standalone tools that are really good at what they do, so that might not necessarily apply to them. But then you look at how good do they solve that particular pain point that you have. The other thing is that I've learned with Ashby is, how good is the company, right? The vendor itself at evolving. How are their, new feature release cadence, right? Like, are they continuously pushing to keep the product sort of in line with, the latest technology and like what's possible out there? So that's really important, kind of looking at that trajectory. Integrations is another big thing, right? So in today's world, there's a lot of great tools, right? And you want to have the capability to seamlessly integrate with other tools, data in, data out, and make sure that you have a consistency throughout your entire process. So those are some of the main things. Cost, of course, plays a part, but I would say if the pain is the bigger the pain, the more you're going to be willing to pay for it. So it kind of starts with that for me, is that how well does it solve your problems, and how many problems does it solve?
Yeah, of course. It's interesting you mentioned, tools that solve multiple problems. And I know a lot of like software platforms, they want to tout that, hey, we can be your only piece of software that you use. And it sounds great. And I'm sure that they have elements of each. But I've been doing this podcast now. This is the 12th episode. We talked probably close to 30 TA leaders. And prior to this, I ran an agency. So I talked to another 100. Not one person's ever told me that they only have one tool in their stack. Not one. So it is what it is, right? Some tools are really good at certain things, and that's okay. Like, if you have your niche and you're really, really good at this one thing and you knock it out of the park, you'll have a very great business, right? I think it's really tough to do everything, though. Hey, if companies want to try it, more power to them. Anderson, as a buyer, when you're evaluating software, what are you looking at?
Yeah, I'm going to be in a lot of the same camps here as Sergey. I think, the biggest thing first is to understand the pain point. So we spend a lot of time when assessing tools, trying to understand it's first internally what the pain points are. The next big thing really has to do how the tool fits into our workflow. And that involves, I think, as a TA leader, including some of your primary stakeholders and your users of the tool into the discussion to understand, hey, if we add such and such a tool into the stack, the workflow that we had before is going to change this, that, and the other way, right? And I'll come back to Agora because, we were working through what, when I did the breakdown, turned out to be about a 15-step offer to, candidate start process, right? Like between generating the offer, sending it, we had tooling that didn't quite talk very well together. And so we had to go through a multiple step process just to get an offer out, then to get it back, then to get it uploaded into the system so that our internal HRIS could accept it, and we build a new candidate profile. And it was dizzying, and the amount of errors or mistakes that came out of that 15-step process, like, just made everyone that was behind the offer pissed, right? And so assessing tools to help not only with our pain points, but including our stakeholders in to say, hey, if we change the process, this is what you're going to be getting. Does this work? So understanding how the tool fits into our overall workflow was another really, really big part of the process. And I'd say, going beyond that, what we'll also look at from an assessment perspective, cost is huge, right? And I think one thing that gets overlooked by companies, especially as they're growing rapidly, is cost today when you sign a contract is not the same as it's going to be in a year or 2 years from now, where you may have doubled the size of your user base, and then you're looking at 2x, like potentially the cost of that tool, which is now a critical part of your tech stack. So, we would typically always ask a question like, what does the renewal process look like? How do you price your tool to really just make sure we understand if we hit all of our goals, what the overall cost will look like for us so that we can try to align our budget in the future to maintain a tool. And then the last bit I'll say about this, as far as like the tool assessment, is really, again, I think looking for how many problems we can solve or what the contingency plan is, right? If we can't solve all of our sort of potential issues or challenges with this one tool, what are the workflow changes going to have to be? How are we going to manage what sort of negative externalities may come from implementing this tool, or the areas that it doesn't solve, right? Because as you said, there are a lot of tools in an individual company's tech stack. And so making sure that even if they don't all talk together, we've got a workflow and a workaround for the challenges that we may see as we're solving the sort of key or sort of core problems with this specific tool.
Mm-hmm. You made up a really good point. I remember when I worked at Salesforce early in my career, we talked a lot about TCO, or total cost of ownership. And I don't think a lot of companies, when they bring software, they think about the total cost of ownership. It's the cost of the people, the cost of implementation, the cost of migrating data, all of it, right? So, all right, Jason. So look, you've heard from two buyers. Hopefully, I think maybe you took notes. I think I saw you writing something down. I know you also did an exhaustive kind of research effort for SproutsAI, where you talked to probably 150 TA leaders, if I'm not correct. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, somewhere there.
So love to get your perspective as a seller on this topic.
Yeah. So my POV as a seller is largely informed for 20 years as being a buyer, right? So one of the things that I think both you guys hit on that I just want to double click on is the change management implementation uptick of something. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until like I got onto the other side of proof of concepts that I saw what a difference that is. I mean, Sergey, Anderson, you both mentioned this idea of like bringing in key stakeholders and understanding how it's going to change our workflow, and like understanding how the people that are going to be using it are really going to use it. To be a talent leader, watching the information about how much or how little an individual recruiter uses your tool has been so eye-opening for me. And like what I then now do is kind of the customer success person as well, is I know when a recruiter is not using it. And like, we will actively go to that recruiter and say like, hey, Sean, like just checking in, you know, like how you liking Sprouts? And what you'll see is honesty around like, I just haven't had time yet. And it's just like,
you're gonna get my backup, man. Cause you're watching me.
It's what it is, right? It's this idea of like, I haven't had a chance to log in or this. And you have to like repeatedly show people value in that. And I think the value in that goes back to some of the stuff we talked about, some of the other questions, speed, inclusivity, making sure that, that you're keeping candidate experience top of mind. Other things you guys touched upon that really kind of brought me to do this side of the house was I kind of got tired of a bunch of tools made by engineers that didn't consult recruiters. Like, frankly, that's one of the things Ashby does well, is built by recruiters, right? But I mean, there's so many tools out there, and I kind of saw that too with Sprouts, where the first version of what we created was very interesting to CTOs and heads of engineering. They loved the way it's designed. It worked. And then we finally now got to the point where we've had to redesign it to work for recruiters and like watch recruiters, how they use the system and stuff like that. So that's another big piece, is you have to make sure that whichever product you're buying, for your stack, for your platform, whichever it may be, is that it actually works for the people that are going to be using it all day long. And then the final piece I'll say is, you guys talk about the integration. I think Ashby uses the term Frankenstack, which I've stolen and used a couple times. Like, you're hard pressed outside of, I would say, HR and sales to find a world where you're asked to live in such a variety of different products. I mean, your head spins, right? And we've been told that that's okay, that you're supposed to go from Workday or Bamboo into your ATS and then into Gem to do your sourcing. And then also, keep notes in your notebook and keep an eye on your inbox and yada, yada, yada. I do firmly believe you're going to start to see tools that will be more platform centric and really will kind of do soup to nuts. That's what we're aiming at right now with Sprouts. Sprouts started as a really sophisticated evaluation tool that, we came forth with what we call adaptive interviewing, which is we listen to when people answer questions during interviews, and the following questions get easier or harder based on response. So you actually are now proving to people what they know versus just double proving what they don't know. Like, we've all been in that debrief where it's like, Jason blew the first system design question and man, he totally blew the second one. It's like, why'd you ask him the second one? That's how the tool started. And we took it to market, and everybody was like, that's cool, but I want this. And that's cool, but I want this. That's how we built it, was listening to customers and facilitating sourcing, facilitating inbound ranking, facilitating outreach, creating your interview kits for you, and then helping you interview. So that's my vision of the future, is I hope we will have fewer Frankenstacks. But regardless of who you choose, it'll be something that was made for recruiters to make recruiters more powerful versus replacing them.
So maybe you're going to make me eat my words. Maybe in whenever, Sprouts hits that critical mass, it will be the main tool in the stack. And if you can do that, kudos to you. But to your point, I think a lot of people have the Frankenstack right now. So I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for Sprouts to, solve that problem. I think the other piece that you mentioned, Jason, which is really interesting, is adoption, right? Adoption is super important in any piece of software. And I think a lot of, executives, leaders, they're the ones, making the decision. But if you don't talk to the team and they don't use it, then you've just wasted a ton of your time evaluating solutions and money. So I think adoption is a huge one. We're kind of running up on time. So I'm going to ask quick roundtable on the last one, maybe 30 seconds on each. We haven't even talked about AI, and this could be a whole other episode, but just curious from each of you, with obviously new AI tools coming out every day, and they're getting more mature and they're getting better. Where do you think AI, in one or two kind of sentences, where do you think AI can have the biggest impact in recruiting moving forward? Let's start with Sergey.
Wow. Tough to do in 30 seconds, but I'll try. So I have tested out a couple of AI sourcing tools. Ashby has some AI capabilities. We actually had an AI hackathon where we stitched together a solution using ChatGPT. What this technology can do is really, I think, it's one of the times I think the hype is justified, honestly. So I see less recruiters being needed to do the same amount of hiring. And I don't see it as a bad thing. I think we're just going to have to lean into our strengths, interpersonal skills, relationship building, trust, all those things I think are still going to be very important. But I think a lot of the sourcing, engaging, application review, scheduling, even potentially some early stage screening, I can see it being done by AI not too long from now. So I'd say within 3 to 5 years, it'll be highly automated, I think.
Big time impact. Jason, let's go to you. What are your thoughts?
Said simply, I think that we are standing in a moment right now to which we could build back TA a little bit better than we have the last two times it got hit this hard. You guys have seen it. There's an arms race for talent. You hire 1 million recruiters, you hire 1 million people, you need to slow down hiring, you save money, you let go of 1 million recruiters, and you let go of too many, and you hire them all back. I mean, I've seen it 3 times now. I think AI is going to give us the opportunity to redistribute talent in a way we haven't seen it. And I'm not saying that you're going to have recruiters that don't go back into recruiting. I'm saying that done right, you can get rid of some of the tasks that Sergey just ran through that aren't the great ones, and you can actually buff TA to go further down the piece. I genuinely believe we will unlock an ability to have recruiters facilitate technical interviews. And I think that technical phone screens by engineers will be gone in a year. I think it's too costly. I think it doesn't scale. I think it impacts URM numbers. There's a whole host of reasons. That's where I see redistribution of sourcing to start being like tech screeners, those sorts of things.
That would be amazing to see. Anderson, last but not least, you're bringing it home.
Yeah, I'd agree with both Jason and Sergey here. I think you're going to see the pendulum swing back to what we saw in terms of the numbers of recruiters in the market maybe 10, 15 years ago. There were a lot less recruiters generally. I do think AI is going to have the largest impact on what I'll say are more of the repetitive tasks that recruiters are responsible for. So sourcing, pipeline management, things like that. In a sort of perfect world, I think as Jason described it, we'll see sort of automation really impact those kind of more basic responsibilities and allow recruiters to focus more on strategic pieces of it, the more human element of the process, right? Engaging candidates, connecting with them, building that rapport and closing, right? I think that'll always be sort of the sort of role here. but AI will really, I think, help augment and hopefully really raise the water level here. So, right, the expectations are higher. What we see from an output and a candidate, sort of a bedside manner from recruiters, the expectation goes up because you're not spending 3 hours in sort of a sourcing mode trying to find that one candidate. You're able to really connect with those candidates that are sort of provided through AI, and manage a process where you're focused on the individual and not hitting specific key metrics or numbers as kind of the key focus.
Wow, that was a lot to unpack, guys. I honestly feel like we could go for another 45 minutes to an hour with this group. It was an amazing panel, gentlemen. I really appreciate your insights. We learned a ton. I think we're gonna do part 2 on this at some point if you guys are into it. Yeah, I think we gotta do part 2 because you guys are coming with the heat today. Like that was good. So, anyways, time's up for those joining in. Appreciate you sticking with us. This is Recruiting Roundtable, and until next time, happy hunting.